The Story of a Soul, the Autobiography of the Little Flower. Chapter 7. Carmel. Monday, April 9th, 1888, was chosen for my entry. It was the day you kept the Annunciation at Carmel, transferred because of Lent. The evening before, we all gathered around the family table, the last time for me, and it nearly broke my heart. Just when I would have liked to have had no notice taken of me at all, everyone spoke to me most tenderly. It made me feel the sacrifice of parting all the more. The next morning, I had a last look around at Les Buissonnets, the charming cradle of my childhood. Then I was off to Carmel. I heard Mass, surrounded by those I loved, and as I had been the evening before. At the communion, when Jesus had come into our hearts, their sobbing was all I could hear. I did not cry at all myself, but as I headed the procession to the cloister door, my heart was thumping so hard that I wondered if I were going to die. It was a moment of agony which must be experienced to be understood. I kissed the whole family, then knelt for Father's blessing. He knelt down too, and he was crying as he blessed me. It was a sight to gladden the angels, an old man offering to God his child, still in the springtime of life. Then the doors of Carmel closed upon me. The two darling sisters who had each been a mother to me embraced me first. Then my new sisters, whose devotion and tenderness are beyond anything those in the world can guess. My dream was at last realized, and peace flooded my soul, a deep, sweet, inexpressible peace, an inward peace which has been my lot these 8.5 years. It has never left me, nor even when trials were at their height. Everything here delighted me, our little cell most of all. It was as though I had been transported to my faraway desert. But my happiness, I must say again, was a calm happiness. Tranquil, unruffled by the slightest wind, were the waters on which the little boat was sailing under the sky of cloudless blue. All my trials had found an ample recompense, and profoundly happy. I kept saying over and over again, I am here forever now. It was no mere transitory happiness, no passing illusion of one's first enthusiasm. Illusions! Thanks be to God's mercy, I had none at all. The religious life was just what I had expected. No sacrifice took me by surprise, though, as you know, Mother, the path on which I took my first steps was strewn with far more thorns than roses. At first, I found the daily bread of my soul dry and bitter. Our Lord allowed Reverend Mother to treat me with great severity, sometimes unconsciously. I could not meet her without getting some reproof or other. On one occasion, I remember, I left a cobweb in the cloister. In front of everyone, she said, "The cloisters are obviously swept by a 15-year-old. It is a disgrace. Go and sweep that cobweb away, and in the future be more careful." Now and then I had to go and spend an hour with her for spiritual direction. Most of it was spent in scolding me, but the worst of it was that I did not know how to correct my faults, my slowness, for example, or my lack of generosity in carrying out my duties. One day it occurred to me that she would surely like to see me spending my free time on some work or other, time usually set aside for prayer. So without raising my eyes, I carried on with my needlework. But as I wanted to be faithful to Jesus and do it all for him, I never told anyone. During my postulancy, our mistress used to send me out to weed the garden at 4:30 every afternoon. It cost me a lot, all the more because I was almost sure to meet Mother Mary Gonzaga on the way. On one such occasion she remarked, "Really, this child does nothing at all. There must be something wrong with a novice that has to be sent for a walk every day." She always treated me like this. How I thank God, my darling mother, for such a virile and valuable training. What a priceless grace. I do not know what would have happened to me if I had become the pet of the community, as those outside seem to think. I would probably have thought my superiors merely as human beings, instead of seeing our Lord in them, and the heart that had been so well guarded in the world would have fallen prey to human attachments in the cloister. Luckily, I escaped such a fate. I can honestly say that, from the moment I entered, suffering opened her arms to me, not only in the trials I have already told you about, but in others keener still, and I embraced her lovingly. I declared my reason for coming to Carmel during the solemn examination before profession. I have come to save souls and above all to pray for priests. And when one wants to attain some end, one must take the means. As Jesus had made me realize that the cross was the means by which he would give me souls, the more often it came my way, the more suffering attracted me. For 5 years I followed this course, though I was the only one to know it, and this practice was nothing else but the hidden flower I wanted to offer to Jesus, the flower whose perfume none would breathe this side of heaven. Even Father Pichon was surprised at what God had worked in my soul within 2 months of entering Carmel. In his view, I was following a tranquil path, while my fervour was truly that of a child. If I had not found it very difficult to open my heart, my interview with the good Father would have resulted in abundant consolation. However, this is what he told me after I had made a general confession. "In the presence of God, Our Lady, the angels, and all the saints, I declare that you have never committed a single mortal sin. Thank God for giving you such a grace without any merit on your part." Without any merit on my part, that was not difficult to believe. I knew how very weak I was and how imperfect. My heart overflowed with gratitude. I had suffered a great deal from the fear that I had stained the purity of my baptismal robe, and it seemed to me that this assurance from a spiritual director, combining knowledge with virtue, as our mother Saint Teresa desired, came from God himself. He went on to say, "My child, may our Lord always be your superior and novice master." He has, in fact, been all this to me, and my spiritual director too, though I do not mean I never opened my heart to my superiors. Far from concealing what was going on there, I have always tried to be an open book to them. Our mistress was a real saint, a perfect example of the early Carmelite. As it was her task to teach me how to work, I spent all my time in her company. I cannot tell you how good she was to me, or how much I loved and respected her. But in spite of all this, my soul did not open out. I did not know how to explain what was going on inside me. Words failed me, and spiritual direction became a torture and martyrdom. One of our older mothers seemed to understand how I felt, for she said to me in recreation one day, "I don't suppose you ever have very much to tell your superiors." "What makes you think that, mother?" "Because you have an extremely simple soul. However, it will be even more simple when you become perfect. The closer we come to God, the more simple we become." How right she was. It was because I was so simple that I found it so difficult to lay open my soul to anyone. But this did not make it any less of a martyrdom. Today, I can express myself without the slightest difficulty, and without losing any of my simplicity. Jesus, as I said, has been my spiritual director. No sooner had Father Pichon undertaken the care of my soul than his superiors sent him off to Canada. Reduced to receiving only one letter a year, the little flower which had been transplanted to the mountain of Carmel soon turned to the director of directors, and she blossomed in the shadow of his cross, having his tears and his precious blood for a refreshing dew, and his adorable face for the sun. I had not realized till then the riches of the treasures hidden in his adorable face, and it was you who taught me how to find them. You, the first to penetrate the mysteries of love hidden in our beloved's face, just as you were the first of us to enter Carmel. You revealed them to me now, and I understood more than ever before that here was true glory, he whose kingdom is not of this world. Taught me that the only royalty that counts consists in being willing to be ignored and despised, and to find one's joy in self-contempt. If only my face, like the face of Jesus, could be hidden from everyone, that none on earth might take any notice of me. I long to suffer and to be despised. Because our Divine Master has always led me along such a path of mercy, and has never made me want anything without giving it to me, I have always found his bitter chalice sweet. Soon after the beautiful ceremony of Marie's profession, at the end of May in 1888, when Therese the Benjamin had the joy of crowning her eldest sister with roses on her mystical marriage day, a new trial fell upon the family. Since his first attack of paralysis, we had noticed that Father used to get tired very easily, and I had often noticed during our journey to Rome that his face betrayed pain and exhaustion, though what had struck me most of all was the wonderful way he was advancing in holiness. He had completely mastered his natural impetuosity, and earthly things no longer seemed to concern him at all. Let me give you an example of this, Mother. During our pilgrimage, the days and nights we spent in our compartment seemed very long to some of the travellers, and they used to make up card parties, which often ended in quite a storm. They asked us to play one day, but we excused ourselves on the plea that we did not know enough about it. The time did not seem at all long to us, as it did to them. It was all too short to enjoy the magnificent views which opened out before our eyes. They were obviously annoyed at this, but Father very calmly defended us, leaving it to be understood that on a pilgrimage there ought to be a little more prayer. One of the players, forgetting the respect due to age, thoughtlessly remarked, "It is a good thing there aren't many more Pharisees about." Father made no reply. He even seemed to take a holy delight in the incident, and before long found an opportunity of shaking hands with the speaker, at the same time accompanying his fine gesture with so kindly a word that it appeared as if he had not noticed the other's rudeness, or at least had forgotten all about it. But you know, Mother, that this habit of forgiving everyone began long before that. Mother and all who knew him vouched for the fact that he never spoke a single uncharitable word. His faith and generosity were equal to every trial. This is how he told a friend of his about my leaving home. "Therese, my little queen, entered Carmel yesterday. Only God could ask such a sacrifice, but he helps me so much that my heart is filled with joy, even in the midst of tears." Such a faithful servant deserved a fitting reward for his virtue, and you will remember, Mother, the reward he himself asked of God that day at visiting time, when he said to us, "I have just returned from Alencoe, In the Church of Notre Dame, I received such great graces and consolations that I prayed, "It is too much, my God. I am too happy. This is not the way to heaven. I want to suffer something for you, and I offer myself as a—" The word victim died on his lips. He dared not say it in front of us, but we understood. There is no need for me to remind you, Mother, of all our griefs. You know the heart-rending details well enough. The time came for me to take the habit, and contrary to all expectations, Father had recovered from his second attack. The bishop fixed the ceremony for January 10th. I had had a long time to wait. What a lovely day it was when it came. Nothing was lacking, not even snow. Have I ever told you, Mother, how fond I am of snow? When I was little, I used to be enchanted by its whiteness. I do not know how it began. Perhaps it was because I was a little winter flower, and the first sight which met my baby eyes was the snow, like a lovely mantle covering the earth. Anyway, I wanted to see nature clad like myself, in white, on my clothing day, but I had almost given up hope because it was so warm the day before that it might have been spring. The 10th came, and the weather was just the same, so I gave up my childish desire as impossible of realization and went out to where Father was waiting for me at the cloister door. His eyes were full of tears as he came toward me. "Here is my little queen," he said, and pressed me to his heart. Then he offered me his arm, and we made our solemn entry into the chapel. It was his day of triumph, his last feast on earth. He had no more to offer. His whole family belonged to God, since Céline had told him that later on she too was going to leave the world for Carmel. Overjoyed, he had replied in his incomparable way, "We must go at once to the Blessed Sacrament and thank our Lord for the graces he has showered upon our family, and for the honour he has done us in choosing his brides from my house. For it is indeed a great honour that he should ask me for my children. If I had anything better, I would not hesitate to offer it to him." Anything better he had himself, and God received him as a victim of Holocaust. He tried him as gold in the furnace, and found him worthy of himself. The sacred ceremony over, as I was returning to the convent, the bishop intoned the Te Deum. A priest told him that this hymn of thanksgiving should only be sung at a nun's profession, but having been begun, it was sung right through. Perhaps it was only fitting that a feast day which summed up all the rest should be so crowned. The moment I set foot in the cloister, my eyes fell upon my little statue of the child Jesus, smiling at me from the midst of flowers and lights. I turned towards the quadrangle, and I saw that it was completely covered in snow. What delicacy on the part of Jesus! To gratify his little bride's every desire, he had sent her snow. What mortal man could ever cause one flake to fall from the sky to charm the one he loves? Everyone was really astounded, because the temperature was all against it, and I know that since then, many, on finding out that I had such a strange love of snow and about my wish, often call it the little miracle of my clothing. So much the better if it were a little strange. It only goes to show the unbelievable condescension of the spouse of virgins, who loves his lilies to be white as snow. The bishop came in after the ceremony and showed himself a real father, reminding me in front of all the priests who were with him of my visit to Bayeux and of my pilgrimage to Rome, without forgetting how I had put up my hair. Then taking my head in his hands, for a long time he made much of me. Our Lord made me think of the caresses he would so soon be lavishing on me in front of all the saints. What wonderful consolation it brought me, an inexpressible sweetness, like a foretaste of heavenly glory. I have said that January 10th was Father's Day of triumph. I liken that day to Palm Sunday and the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem. Father's glory of the day was followed, like that of his divine Master, by a sorrowful passion. And as the sufferings of Jesus pierced the heart of his mother, so the sufferings and humiliations of the one we loved best on earth pierced ours. I remember June 1888. We feared he might have cerebral paralysis, and I surprised our mistress by saying to her, "I am suffering very much, mother, but I feel I can suffer yet more." I was not expecting at that time the trial which was in store for us. I did not know then that on February 12th, only a month after my clothing, Father would have so bitter a chalice to drink. I did not say I could suffer more when I knew that. I can find no words to express our anguish, and I am not going to try. Later on in heaven, we will love to recall the dark days of exile, and indeed even now, Father's 3 years of martyrdom seem to be the most desirable and fruitful years we have ever had, and I would not exchange them for the most sublime ecstasies. In face of such a priceless treasure, my heart cries out in gratitude. Blessed be thou, my God, for the days wherein thou hast afflicted us. Darling mother, it was so bitter a cross, and yet how precious and sweet, since drawing from our hearts such acts of love and gratitude, we no longer walked along the way of perfection, we ran. Leonie and Céline were no longer of this world, though living in its midst. The letters they used to write at this period breathed a wonderful resignation, and I shall never forget Céline's visit. Far from keeping us apart, the bars of the grille only brought us closer together. We were animated by the same thoughts and desires, by the same love of Jesus and of souls. No word about earthly matters passed our lips. As before at Les Buissonnets, we winged our way, not only in thought, but also in heart, beyond all space and time, and chose to suffer and to be despised on earth, that we might taste eternal happiness. My desire for suffering was fully realized, yet it lost none of its attraction, and it was not long before my soul had to share my heart's martyrdom. My dryness increased. Both heaven and earth denied me consolation, yet, though surrounded by the waters of tribulation which I sought so ardently, I was the happiest person in the world. I spent the time of betrothal like this, a betrothal which went on far longer than I would have wished, where even when my year was up, our mother told me I must not dream of making my profession yet, as the superior was against it. I had to wait 8 more years. I found it hard to accept such a sacrifice at first, but before long my soul was flooded with divine light. I had been meditating on Surin's foundations of the spiritual life, and one day realized that my eagerness to make my vows was tainted with self-love. If I really belonged to Jesus as his plaything, to console and entertain him, it was for me to do what he wanted, not what I wanted. I realized too that a bride would not be very pleasing to her bridegroom on their wedding day unless she were beautifully arrayed, and I had done very little toward this. So I told our Lord, I do not ask you to hasten my profession any more. I'll wait as long as you like, but I'll make sure that our union is not delayed through any fault of mine. So I am going to work as hard as I can to make a bridal gown enriched with diamonds and jewels of every kind. And when it is lovely enough, I am sure you will let nothing stand in the way of making me your bride. I set to work with renewed zeal. Since taking the habit, I had already been given abundant light on religious perfection, and especially on the vow of poverty. When I was a postulant, I loved using nice things and having everything at hand when I needed it. Jesus bore that patiently. He does not like teaching us everything at once, but normally enlightens us a little at a time. At the beginning of my spiritual life, when I was between 13 and 14, I used to wonder what else there was for me to learn. It did not seem possible that I could ever understand perfection any better than I already did. I soon found, however, that the more one advances, the further off one sees the goal to be. I am quite resigned now to seeing myself always imperfect, and I even make it my joy. To return to what our Lord taught me. One day after Compline, I had searched in vain for our lamp on the shelves, where it should have been. As it was the time of great silence, I could do no more about it, and thought reasonably enough that one of the sisters had taken ours by mistake. But it meant my spending an hour in darkness, and just when I had calculated on doing a lot of work. I should certainly have complained about it without the light of grace, but as it was, instead of that, I rejoiced in the thought that poverty consisted in lacking not only little luxuries, but even things one could not do without. In the dark, I found my soul flooded with divine light. At this point, I developed a real love for the most ugly and inconvenient things. For example, I was delighted when I found that a dainty little jug in our cell had been replaced by a larger one, chipped all over. I also tried not to make excuses, but found it very hard, especially where our mistress was concerned, because I did not want to hide anything from her. My first victory was not a very big one, but it cost me a great deal. Someone or other had left a little vase on a windowsill, and it was found broken. Our mistress thought it was my fault. She seemed very annoyed that I had left it there, and told me to be more careful next time, adding that I had no idea at all of tidiness. Without saying a word, I kissed the ground and promised I would take more care in the future. Such little things, as I have said, cost me a great deal, because I was so lacking in virtue, and I had to remind myself that it would all be made known on the day of judgment. I concentrated most of all on hidden acts of virtues. I used to like folding up the sisters' choir mantles when they had forgotten them, and would seek out 1,000 ways of doing things for them. I was also given an attraction to penance, though I was never allowed to indulge in it. The only mortification which came my way was the mortification of self-love. But it did me much more good than corporal penances would have done. Nevertheless, Our Lady was helping me to prepare a wedding garment for my soul, and as soon as it was finished, every obstacle disappeared. My profession was fixed for September 8th, 1890. I really might have written many pages about all I have tried to say in so few words, but those pages will never be read on earth.